Poland in the 80s, went to Yugoslavia, went to an Italian refugee camp. And in the 80s, obviously, I was a kid. I didn't know this. My grandfather, who was a World War II artillery Marine, Guadalcanal, Leyte Gulf, my dad's dad, lived in La Jolla. And I remember when we lived there for a couple of years at his house. My dad was back and forth between Virginia and here, in between getting houses. And my grandfather, R.O. Hunter, he had Poles come and live with him at his house. And I remember at all times in the 80s, he had 3 or 4 Polish escapees come to the U.S. He sponsored them, found them work. A couple of them went to coach at UCSD, coach soccer. I remember Jersey was one of these guys, and that for me, I was 12 years old or so when that was going on, but I remember it to this day. We found out later that my grandfather was in Italy at the refugee camp with my wife and her family. Her sister and her parents were there in Italy at the refugee camp. They toured it, my grandparents did, while my wife was trying to get sponsored. Her family was trying to get sponsored to come over here. And she's now a great San Diegan, but we don't have any heroes anymore. There's not a single living Medal of Honor winner from the Iraq War. So from 2003 till now, at least under President Obama, there was not a single, and President Bush, not a single living Medal of Honor winner. That means if a kid wants to go say, hey, who can I look at who fought in the Iraq War, there's a lot of great deeds and a lot of great things done, but there's not a single Medal of Honor winner. We're not going to have any more heroes, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why I'm here. Is we need people for our kids to look up to. If you look at Merian's history, it's not just all these military things, but in between World War I and World War II, he left everything and toured the world on a sailboat. Went to Iran, went to Egypt, stayed with shahs and emperors, and met people and lived life to the fullest. He's the kind of person you want your kid, whether your son or daughter, to look at his story and go, hey, I can give back, and by giving back, I can also become a great person and live a great life. Making movies. It's kind of funny. I didn't know until we were doing this. I've seen she wore a yellow ribbon, Fort Apache, The Searchers, all these John Wayne movies. My dad and I used to watch these all the time. I've seen every one of Merian's movies, those Westerns, without knowing that those were his movies. I think that's pretty exceptional. I want to close with this last thing, and I do have to read this because it's a little bit longer. I'm going to close with not my words, but the great Ronald Reagan's words. And let me start, as the sun rises over the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, it goes over to the U.S. Capitol where I work, and legislators that represent the American people work, and then the sun keeps going, and you hit the Washington Monument. That stands for our very first commander-in-chief, who gave up his job so that we could be a democracy. He was asked to stay on and be a king, and he said no. George Washington is the reason, not just because he was our first president, but because he gave it up and said, I don't want to be a king. We want to have representation here from the people, by the people, and for the people. So you pass the George Washington Monument. Then you have Thomas Jefferson's monument. And if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it is inflamed with his passion for this country. And you go a little bit farther and you go over the Potomac, and what you have there is you have a giant cemetery with thousands and thousands of white headstones with mostly crosses or stars of David. Now you have everything on them that represent a small portion of the thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that died for this country, going back from the beginning of the country until now. And here's what Reagan had to say about it in his opening inaugural address from the west side of the Capitol. He said, beyond those monuments to heroism is the Potomac River, and on the far shore, the sloping hills of Arlington National Cemetery, with its row upon row of simple white markers bearing crosses or stars of David. They add up only to a tiny fraction of the price that has been paid for our freedom. Each one of those markers is a monument to the kind of hero I spoke of earlier. Their lives ended in places called Bella Wood, the Argonne, Omaha Beach, Salerno, and halfway around the world on Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Pork Chop Hill, the Chosin Reservoir, and in 100 rice paddies and jungles of a place called Vietnam. And you could add to that our Persian Gulf Wars. You can add to that all the Middle Eastern countries that we've been in as Americans fighting for other people's freedom. Under one such marker lies a young man, Martin Treptow, who left his job in a small-town barbershop in 1917 to go to France with the famed Rainbow Division. There on the Western Front, he was killed trying to carry a message between battalions under heavy artillery fire. We're told that on his body was found a diary, and on the